Hello, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of October the 24th. Don't forget to like this video, share it, subscribe, and leave your comments below. Today, I'll be talking about Ukrainian front line and some fresh updates. They are not extremely something special, but we have to be in touch, to be on update what is going on. And today I'll be talking about some few directions of the Ukrainian front line. What is updating on there? So please join us and let's start. Indeed, this mechanized trend started in Dobropilya and Pokrovsk, and it continues, spreading perhaps in smaller volumes, in smaller numbers to other sections of the front. Why? The reasons are simple and clear. We've talked about them more than once, but I'll repeat them again. These reasons lie in the fact that the Russians need to show results. That's why they are not hoping for a breakthrough. The Russians need to somehow protect their infantry, which must be delivered through the kill zone to the forward positions, so that this infantry at least has a chance to carry out an assault. Otherwise, if they go on foot and have to cross all these gray zones or kill zones, it all ends there. It ends very badly for the Russian assault troops, basically. And third, there's no greenery, the tree lines are bare, there's nowhere to move except with the help of vehicles. That's why this trend was actually started quite actively by the Russians in the Dobropilya-Pokrovsk direction. By the way, some news from Dobropilya. Just yesterday, there were videos of our soldiers raising the blue and yellow flag in Kucheriiv Yar. Later, other footage appeared. Literally right after this news about the liberation, our soldiers were already showing how Ukrainian paratroopers were evacuating civilians, peaceful people who were trapped in Dobropilya, or more precisely in Kucheriiv Yar near Dobropilya. At the moment of the Russian troops' breakthrough, our soldiers managed to find and evacuate 10 civilians to a safe place after the liberation. Here you can see how all of this was done with a drone. By the way, a note was delivered to them by drone telling them where to go together with our soldiers, indicating the evacuation point. And then the soldiers proceeded to evacuate these 10 civilians who had essentially become hostages of the rapid Russian breakthrough toward Dobropilya. By the way, it's also worth emphasizing another point regarding official communication. Remember, when this breakthrough had just happened, our official spokespersons were commenting that everything was fine, nothing serious, just some minor breakthroughs there. These people, the civilians who were evacuated, they became victims of this. Of the process where everything is supposedly fine, just some isolated groups, nothing to worry about. The 50 occupiers who surrendered in Opolon yesterday are the result of that massive group that broke through, 50 of them. If 50 surrendered in Opolon, then how many actually broke through there in total? Everything is fine. Lies don't kill us, they make us stronger. So we need to emphasize certain points about this. Although, to be fair, there are cases where spokespersons, officials, and communications do set the right standards. Truthful and correct statements. For example, there was such a statement yesterday regarding Kherson. There have already been statements about Kherson for a week now. In fact, the go-lighter of the occupied part of Kherson region, Volodymyr Saldo, is spreading the narrative that supposedly Russian occupiers have landed on the right bank of the Dnipro and have begun clearing out districts of Kherson, claiming that this is a full-scale operation. That is, the battle for Kherson has begun. As I said yesterday, this does not correspond to reality at all. Showing footage of how our soldiers, the artillerymen, are hitting enemy ammunition depots with munitions on the left bank of Kherson. In this way, they are not even allowing active shelling of the right bank, at least doing everything possible in Kherson itself. The Russians were the ones spreading these panic moods the most, or trying to stir up this kind of hysteria, which concerned the shipbuilding district, this island area near the bridges, on the approaches to which they carried out shelling with their vehicle. And it was specifically about this shipbuilding district that Saldo's story was told, claiming that supposedly the Russians landed here and began to control the city, and that they repelled all Ukrainian attacks. Russian assault troops, this is not true. And here, in fact, it's worth praising the communication. Vladislav Voloshin, the spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, personally went to the Korabel district. He stood near the relevant locations and recorded the video message where he said that this does not correspond to reality. The Korabel district is controlled by the defense forces. The same was done by the soldiers of the 34th Coastal Defense Brigade, who also stated yesterday that they control exactly this area. There is not a single Russian in Kherson. In this way, they refute Russian propaganda, which at this moment is definitely just propaganda and nothing more. The video from Voloshin, the spokesperson for the defense forces in the south, I suggest you watch it. It evokes certain emotions at times. What he meant by this, well, you'll see the video yourself and understand everything. But at the very least, it confirms the fact that there are no enemy forces in Kherson, especially in the Korabel district.
Their media are currently and repeatedly claiming through various channels and reports that they're already in Kherson, that they've successfully captured and taken control of this particular part of the city called Korabel. However, I want to emphasize and make it absolutely clear that they're not here. The gold of the Carpathians, the gold of songs and melodies, I bring to you on this festive and joyful day. Let the songs ring out, let them resound and echo everywhere, in every corner. May there be happiness, peace, and love on earth for all people. Kherson is ours.
There are no Russians there. What did Mr. Voloshin mean by this song? Maybe he just wanted to show his good mood this way. The point is, that's how it is. There are no Russians here. In this sense, the communication is absolutely truthful. The only thing is there are, let's say, rather difficult and troubling news regarding Pokrovsk and the enemy's attempts to advance. In particular, with attempts to cut off our logistics, especially to the south and southeast of the city. Well, after all, you can see that the creation of this gray zone, which, yes, objectively is gray, and enemy assault groups are entering here on the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk. Not only that, but in principle, the Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad agglomeration is a rather small pocket that's difficult to access. Next to it, another small pocket is forming, a small one. In the area of Chunishin, Lysivka, and Suki Yar, as you can imagine, the logistic situation will be quite difficult and challenging, especially when you take into account the fact that the road leading to this area is precisely the one along which the enemy troops are currently advancing. That is to say, the route marked in yellow on the map is the very same road along which supplies and provisions are being delivered to the front lines, as indicated by these arrows. This means that any movement of resources, equipment, or reinforcements must contend with the ongoing enemy advance, making the situation even more complicated and precarious for those relying on this supply line. To Lysivka and also to Chunishani, so we'll see how events unfold here. I hope that the corps responsible for the defense here, well, actually, I'm not just hoping, I'm sure that he understands all the circumstances of this complicated situation, and the enemy will at least try to cut off these supply routes or attempts to break through to Pokrovsk. Although in reality the situation there is quite dynamic, there are periods when there are actually reports of clearing operations. And these same reports reach me as well. I share them in my reviews, friends. Sometimes they may be absolutely true, sometimes they may be false, but even on the ground it's hard to understand whether a complete clearing has taken place or not, or if the enemy is still hiding somewhere. Therefore, in any case, we need to pay attention to this threat and danger, and at the very least, focus our attention on it, because it objectively exists. Just as there is an objective, the danger of large, truly large gray zones that exist in the Lyman direction is real. In principle, you could say that these are not exactly areas under the control of Russian forces. How do you see these gray zones that have recently appeared on the deep state map in the areas of Yampil and in the areas of Zarishne? And these gray zones stretch all the way to the former Lyman along the Zherebets River. Well, they are really vast. What does this indicate? The Third Army Corps, which is holding the defense here, claims that there aren't even any prerequisites to talk about the beginning of battles for Lyman. However, the analysts from Deep State, whose map I use and analyze, say that in reality, we need to pay very serious attention to this section of the front so that soon we don't start seeing reports with formulations like the battle for Lyman. Because even the Deep State analysts themselves, on their Telegram channel, they shared photo and video evidence of the enemy, specifically in quite large numbers gathering in this forest. On the approaches to Lyman, in the forested area, there are extended sections of the Serebryansky forestry where the enemy is trying to advance closer to Lyman to amass and concentrate their infantry here in these woods, in the triangle between Yampol, Lyman, and Zarikny. And thus, due to the fact that there are simply more of them physically, they are seeping through in small groups between the positions of our country's defense forces. In addition, Deep State notes the large number and activity of Russian pilots who are targeting the positions of our crews. They are operating, creating obstacles, technological ones in the form of electronic warfare, and their units here are destroying positions, not allowing our fighters to fortify them. Accordingly, due to the lack of infantry, we are objectively suffering here. And that's exactly why there are such large gray zones, because the enemy sometimes infiltrates and tries, for example, to infiltrate our rear positions. At the moment, there is no talk of fighting for Lyman. Not even close, but just look at the number of gray zones, the width of these gray zones. I'll highlight them in white, the color closest to gray. And in the area of Lyman, Yampol, Zarikne, and further south, in the area of Dronivka, Serebryanka, Hrihorivka, and Siversk, all of these are gray zones, two stretches of gray zone. They are very wide in the Lyman direction, and the Lyman direction is defined precisely by this feature that the enemy, here there is no opportunity to gain a foothold, but we also do not have enough defensive lines or defensive formations to hold them back. Here, the infantry's advance is completely halted, and it is precisely within this gray zone, particularly to the south in the area of Siversk. Yesterday, on October 23rd at around 10 a.m., a mechanized assault by the enemy was carried out on the positions of the 54th and 81st Brigades. This is actually the trend I mentioned, which started in Dobropilia and is continuing in other directions. So, according to the available information, the enemy used 20 motorcyclists, so-called Banzai motorcyclists, in an attempt to break through. And then a column consisting of a so-called turtle tank, just covered all over, the T-11 Chimera tank with this incredible grille and armor all around, the turtle tank. That's what they call it, and 3 BMPs. So one column is moving forward. These were 20 Banzai motorcyclists who set out from the area of Verkhnyo-Kamyanske. I'll show you on the map where this is in the direction of Siversk and still within the red-gray zone. These Russians were hit, and then from the Serebryanka area, that is from the more northern outskirts, a column moved out towards Siversk. This one, according to the information I have, absolutely all the equipment, the tank, 3 BMPs, armored vehicles that also took part in this attack, and more than 20 motorcycles were either destroyed or hit. From the information provided by the 81st Brigade, I know that at least for yesterday, 15 enemy infantrymen were also eliminated during the destruction of the consequences of this enemy breakthrough attempt towards Siversk. So this is yet another city where they are trying to, well, also gain a foothold in the city. And you see, for the Russians at this stage of the campaign, this is a fundamentally important thing, to hold on to cities. Because staying, well, it's good that it's autumn now, but just imagine winter, staying out in the open field would simply mean dooming themselves to death. Because in the snow, it's easy to track movements.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The occupiers would be picked off there, and that's the current situation at the front. I know this not from some random conversations or from reading Telegram channels, but directly from the soldiers themselves, among whom we are as well. I have many friends who say that as soon as you spot even a single occupier, well, you know what our soldiers call the occupiers. It starts with a P and ends with an S. So as soon as even one of them is spotted, there are already 3 FPV drones ready to fly out and destroy him. In reality, they do fantastic work. But where there is a higher density of buildings, for example, as in any fairly large city, it becomes much more difficult. Without infantry, drones are not capable of handling such tasks, and that makes sense. That is exactly why the Russians are focusing on Kupiansk. They are clinging to Mirnohrad, Pokrovsk, and now to Kostiantynivka, trying to hold on to Siversk and also to Lyman. So we have these urban agglomeration points that they will definitely try to hold on to. For now, they've more or less managed to dig in with their teeth around Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, and Kostiantynivka. Yes, the first signs of urban combat are emerging, but only on the outskirts. For now, the occupiers are being held back at Siversk. Here too, the gray zone reaches the outskirts of Siversk, and the first clashes are noticeable here, but overall, the occupiers have not succeeded yet. And as we just discussed regarding this area, the enemy has also not started fighting for this settlement near Siversk. I promised to show on the map the directions from which the Russians attacked from the area of Verkhnyo-Kamyanske towards Siversk. They rode in on motorcycles, and then a column with a tank and 3 armored vehicles moved out from Serebryanka. Well, that's how things stand. Further south, there is another area south of Siversk. This is Kucheriiv Yar, which is still holding out in urban combat, and its resistance has not yet been broken. The Russians And just yesterday, the soldiers of my 24th Brigade, which is holding the defense in Kucheriiv Yar, were covering the area of Kostiantynivka from an advance from the northeast. Because from the southeast, it was the area of Toretsk, from where, right now, from the south, from these zones, the Russians have started. They are approaching Kostiantynivka, reaching its southeastern outskirts, and from the north, where Kucheriiv Yar is located. Well, you can't really say that the situation there is much more stable, but at least there are also mechanized units. Assaults are taking place, and the 24th Royal Brigade demonstrated this, like in the morning of October 20th. A few days ago, the enemy used armored vehicles in an attempt to break through. By the way, I talked about this assault, that it happened precisely then. In parallel with the assault attempts in the Dobropilia direction, these same attacks were taking place in Kucheriiv Yar. Yeah. At the very least, we see 3 armored vehicles that the enemy used in such assaults. These are BMPs and MTLBs. MTLB, Motoliga, I haven't heard that name in ages. I didn't even know they were still theoretically present on the front lines. But Motoligas and BMPs, 2 ATVs and 3 motorcycles. The Russians used them to try to carry out an operation in Kucheriiv Yar, but well, nothing worked out for them. You can see how this equipment is burning. Here's a BMP one, stopping, and then it's neutralized and finished off by our soldiers. Although it's clear that this equipment is worthless, I don't understand. It's basically disposable in this context. The most important thing for them is that this equipment delivers the infantry, that it brings the paratroopers who will then spread out somewhere and continue their assault toward our positions. That's it. These are the main tactics behind the enemy's mechanized assaults on most fronts right now. By the way, the same thing is happening near Malotokmachka, also in the Zaporizhzhia region. Just in the past week, the Russians have done similar things. They carried out assaults with mechanized columns. But for the most part, this doesn't yield any significant results. That's the situation, friends. On that note, I'll end here. Thank you for your attention. Take care. All the best, and until we meet again.